All right. Thanks everyone for joining us for this month, Coffee Talk, Cross-Sell Will Make You Jump. We are joined today by Dan Sikora, a business consultant here at Vendavo. Dan has been with Vendavo for close to a couple years now and been in the pricing space for longer than he would like to admit. Just some housekeeping here. We will be taking questions at the end, so please drop those in the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. And other than that, Dan, please take it away.
Yeah, we do want to make sure that we flash up our confidentiality slide here. We are going to share some inner workings types of things, so we hope you will respect our confidentiality. But let's get right into it. For those of you who do not know Vendavo, this is your first time meeting us, I just want to give a little bit about who we are, and then we're going to get into the content straight away. So Vendavo is a commercial excellence software platform. We roughly break that down into three areas, and I'll start at the bottom here in blue. Vendavo Intelligent CPQ, that usually sits between CRM on one side and ERP on the other. Of course, we connect with everybody. But in our CPQ space, this is to help salespeople be more effective, selling more products, sometimes with guided selling, making sure they have the right prices when they are trying to sell that business, and ultimately speeding up that quoting process because the first quote wins most of the time. As we move up, there's this middle lane in gray. That's how I knew Vendavo. I used to be a customer a decade ago. That's Vendavo Price Point, where you're trying to set your prices and manage all the costs coming in and competitor data and all that kind of fun stuff. You're setting your strategies there. And last year, gosh, almost exactly, we made an acquisition in the rebate and channel management space. So that's for rebates and incentives, accruals and settlements, all the good things that go along with that. The final swim lane that we think about, we spend a lot of time and effort developing products for, is this insights or analytics swim lane. That's going to be descriptive and diagnostic analytics about customers, about products. We do price volume mix, and then we do optimization in two flavors. Certainly price optimization, that's our heritage as a company, but then also sales optimization, product suggestions. And that's what we're going to focus on today in this conversation about crosstalk. So a little bit more about me. My career led me to cross-selling. My first job out of college, I was an economist for the federal government. I measured inflation, which nobody wanted to talk to me about when I was like 23. But nowadays people are interested, so that's kind of cool. I have been a leader of pricing teams. I have done revenue management. I've done it in the B2B and B2C space. I've done it in a manufacturing and distribution context. So I have a lot of experience there. And I wanted to share just a couple of statistics about where we are in the economy and why I think cross-selling is going to be even more important going forward. So over the pandemic, everybody, and I mean everybody, raised their prices. We saw record revenue and record profit during that time because basically it was a green light to have your prices go up. And I posit that the two most common reasons that companies cited when raising prices, they're not going to hold for the rest of this year and beyond. What are those two reasons? The first one is here. The supply chain constraints are easing. I have a chart from Bloomberg that shows shipping costs, which had a huge spike during the pandemic, if you can see my mouse here, and pretty much fell off the table. They're back to historical levels. And if you're a Bloomberg fan, just on the 18th, they released a podcast that discussed the OTR, over-the-road trucking and warehousing costs. They're also at these pre-pandemic levels or below. So your air cover for raising price because the supply chain is all locked up, it's not really true anymore in most cases. Some instances there that they're still bottlenecks, but in general, not really a constraint. Number two, inflation. This is the thing I used to measure back in the day. And inflation and commodity prices are still high, but the rate of those increases is slowing. And what we're seeing here is the producer price index year-over-year change. This is data through April of 2023, which is the most up-to-date data. And we can see, boy, it's a very similar trend I'm looking at here. Huge increase, 10, 12, 12% increases in price from a year-over-year basis due to inflation. And that's starting to fall. It's not starting to fall, it has fallen. We're down approaching that 2% level that the Federal Reserve targets on a year-over-year basis. So we're kind of in a normal inflationary environment here where it's modest. It's not a great reason to just jack prices through the roof. So when you take these two things together, the window is closing. It might have even closed to grow purely through a price increase. So you need to find a different way to grow your revenue and margin. So let's get back to me. I started as a numbers guy and then things changed. I maybe fell into sales, which I have to assure you, it is much more interesting and fun to be closer to making the money than for counting and tracking the money back when I was a numbers guy. But sales, while it's fun, it's difficult. And that's because sales always comes with a quota. Nobody is going to buy from me just because I have a quota to meet. So I thought to myself, I need to find a way or some direction for how I can continue to fill that bucket, that quota bucket, quarter after quarter, year after year. And what I found were two statistics that really resonated with me. The first one on the left, it's 5 to 25 times more expensive to acquire new customers than it is to retain existing customers. And think about that from a company perspective. That's going to conferences, you're paying for conference passes and the travel to get there. You're taking people out to dinner, you're developing relationships, you're doing additional marketing. That's a lot of money for a company. But on a personal basis, for a salesperson, it's much more time intensive to go after a new customer than it is to work with an existing customer. So I want to probably maximize what I'm doing with my existing customers. Additionally, you have a 14 times higher probability of selling to an existing happy customer than you do to a new customer. And that kind of just makes sense. They're happy to do business with you. There's already something about you that they like, so you should continue to nurture that relationship and grow with them. Now, the takeaway with respect to cross-selling is not that I should only sell to existing customers. That's not it at all. The takeaway is actually we should take what works with existing customers and deploy that in a way that allows us to sell more into current accounts and makes us more effective in selling into new accounts. So how do we do that? I have 3 tactics for you to kind of define what we're going to get into today. The first one, cross-sell. Because you bought this thing, you should also buy this other thing. Classic example here, would you like fries with that? I see that you bought a hamburger, would you like fries? What about upsell? Because you bought this thing, we think you should upgrade in terms of quality or value to Y. Classic example here, would you like to supersize that? You have this meal right here, and for a minimal outlay more, I can give you much more value. And finally, this one's kind of a special case, unit upsell. You bought X units, but similar customers buy Y units. Now, my example here is a little bit contrived, but it actually happens. And the punchline here is, would you like anything else? So imagine you are in the drive-through of a hamburger stand. You see a minivan come in filled with a bunch of kids. Obviously, there's going to be a parent driving, but filled with a bunch of kids. And if they buy one hamburger, you're going to have to think to yourself, what are they going to do? Take a bite and pass it around? No, of course not. They should be buying more hamburgers. When you see a minivan full of kids come in, they're going to need more than one. So as a seller, you should perk up and say, oh, we should have a conversation about this. I see that you're only buying one, but would you like to buy more? Maybe you could have some kind of volume deal, buy 2 and get the 3rd free or something like that. But it's a good indication that, hey, we should have a conversation. You should be buying more. Now, for the sake of today's conversation, we are going to focus on this cross-sell piece. And the reason for that, in our experience, in my experience actually, this is the most common scenario that you will find in the B2B space, okay? So at Vendavo, we have our sales optimizer. I already mentioned it before. We generate product recommendations. It's a cloud solution that uses data to generate opportunities for sellers when quoting. That's the big idea here. So your value progression is you cross-sell, And by doing so, you increase your average order value, and ultimately you capture a larger share of wallet. And the most exciting thing on the slide is down here. We have calculated with our customers that have our VSO product, our solution there, it can be worth 5 to 15% revenue. And that's just on the top line. What does it look like though? I have an example here of what Vendavo Sales Optimizer looks like in Salesforce. To be clear, we integrate with all CRMs, and we also pipe in or push our recommendations through things like CPQ. We can put it even in green screens. That happens with one of our customers. So this is just an example of what it can look like. And a few critical things. We have a recommendation tab. This is where all of the calculations that generate our recommendations end up. And we can see for a customer up top, in this instance, Acme, we have product recommendations. So we can see Acme has should be buying routers and notebooks and wet mops and all these other things. I guess we were looking at Jansan at this time. Critically, we have two columns, one for relevance or the fit of the opportunity, these products at this customer, and also the opportunity size. Some of our customers like to have a threshold. Maybe they would say, they don't want anything under $100, but you can see that some of these are pretty good size opportunities. And when you're thinking about selling into industrial size customers, these opportunity sizes grow. Finally, and I find this quite exciting, we have the opportunity to provide feedback to the algorithm so it generates better recommendations over time. This is your machine learning AI type of stuff. Usually you need to give one of two signals. Either you like the opportunity and you add it into the basket. That's a good recommendation. We are growing our average order value here. Or the other side of that, maybe we're going to decline the opportunity for a multitude of reasons. And that's why there's this little Y button here. Maybe the customer doesn't need this product right now. Maybe they will never buy it from us. Maybe it's just not a good recommendation and the system should stop giving you these recommendations going forward. Regardless, this is a quick way for the salesperson to say, good idea, bad idea, and have the algorithm spit out better recommendations going forward. So the intent of the rest of this conversation is to give best practices around cross-sell and how you can fit it into holistic plan and some watchwords, what you should be careful about when you're implementing this. Patrick, my colleague, has just dropped a link into the chat that discusses how these calculations are made. Now, with that being said, I am happy to get into the nitty-gritty of some of those calculations when we get to the question and answer session. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, don't be shy about asking, or you can go to the link that Patrick just had. It's a pre-recorded coffee talk that actually my boss, Dave, gave a couple months ago that illuminates how those calculations are made. Okay, we have an idea of I probably can't grow through price anymore. Cross-selling is important. I have at least a notion of what that could look like. Let's get below the fold and talk about what a good cross-sell recommendation should be. Usually, you have to be careful of going to the extremes. You do not want a recommendation that is too broad. The example I have at the bottom there is milk at the grocery store. Well, thanks a lot, Dan. Everybody already buys this when they're going to the grocery store. I didn't need a system to tell me to sell more milk to people coming in. In fact, the people who aren't buying milk probably have a good reason to. Maybe they're lactose intolerant or they already bought it this week. This is not a good recommendation. It's so broad that like, yeah, of course, I'm already going to try and sell this. Doesn't help the sales team. At the other end, too specific. I have kind of a contrived example, a dried hibiscus blossom. That's like one guy who needs it one time a year for one recipe that he's trying to make. That's interesting, but it's not frequent enough for me to really build a business case and spend the time and effort trying to do all this cross-sell stuff. It's just a one-off product that that person needs. So it's too infrequent to count on regularly. And what you need, kind of in a Goldilocks scenario, prices or recommendations that are just right. Many people buy this sometimes, but nobody buys it all the time. And the example I have are toothpicks at the grocery store. If you see somebody with a shopping cart that has cubed cheese and little salamis or something like that, and maybe olives and other things that indicate they're going to be hosting a party soon, they should buy toothpicks to go with it. Otherwise, they're going to have to grab their hands in there and it gets all grubby. As a seller, not only if you make this recommendation for cross-sell, not only are you going to potentially grow your average order value, you are doing a service to your customer. Your customer might say something like, "My gosh, I forgot about the toothpicks. Thank you for reminding me." Or they might say, "We didn't know that you had toothpicks. Thank you for telling me. I am happy to buy them from you because it saves me a trip across town to buy them from someplace else." So the idea here is you're getting a win-win. Of course, you're going to sell more products, make more money, but you are improving or closening their relationship with your customer by providing a service, knowing about the products they need based on transactions that you've seen before, and saying, "Don't forget this product here." So we know our cross-sell recommendations need to be just right, but how do they fit into the bigger picture? Glad you asked. I have 4 ideas that you should keep in mind to fit cross-selling into your sales motion. And the first one is you need a high resolution customer profile. What do I mean by that? You're going to, of course, use transactional data to start to generate some of these recommendations, but you should also keep an eye, I guess, external. That could mean you're pulling in things like potential data. If a customer is only buying, I don't know, $1,000 worth of product for you, but their size indicates they could be buying $10,000 worth of product from you, that is an external data source that's going to help you figure that out. Additionally, you'll want to know, is this customer growing? Maybe they're setting up a new plant or a new branch or something like that, that indicates they're going to need new products. It's a good idea to get ahead of the curve then to know, as you're standing this new facility up, you're going to need these different things. Now that you have your high-res customer profile, this is my favorite one here. You need a discrete customer growth path. You should not just say something like, "I want to sell more things to more customers all the time." Well, great. Why didn't I think of that? If I could do that, I'd be the salesperson of the year. What you need is something specific. Here's an example. I know that the suburbs of Chicagoland, where I live, they're growing rapidly. And the reason for that is because people are moving from the city out to the suburbs. So I know that contractors are busy, and I want to sell more fuses to electrical contractors in the suburbs of Chicagoland because we know that the economy is growing there and there's a lot of new building going on. So you can understand how that is a very focused pocket of an opportunity where I have a specific customer type in mind with a specific set of products in mind that they can in turn go sell. I can have a campaign for that. And when you make enough of these campaigns, it adds up to real money. Contrast that versus the example I gave before of just selling more things to more people. That's too broad. I can't do anything with that. So now I have my profiles, I have my growth plans for my customers. Now I need to get started. The reason I bring this one up is Vendavo works with some of the biggest companies in the world, top 10 Fortune 500. And no matter who I speak with, I always hear the same refrain. We would love to do cross-selling or price optimization or whatever it is, but our data isn't perfect. Okay, I hear you. Your data may not be perfect, but if you wait for perfect, you'll be waiting forever. And the same goes for some of that infrastructure. What I mean by that is you don't need to have a CRM in place to take advantage of cross-selling. I know I showed you a screenshot of Vendavo Sales Optimizer in Salesforce. That's a great long-term goal to get to, having a system like VSO integrated with your CRM or CPQ or some other system. But you don't start there. That's something to drive toward. My suggestion is do a little bit with what you have, and that might just be, Excel. Start there and collect a couple of wins. Once you collect some wins, then you earn the right to build the business case and say, look what we did just with Excel. Imagine if we invested in a solution that could help us do this on a grander and more automated basis. And that brings me to my last point here. You must build a repeatable model. Cross-selling is not a one-time activity. It's something that you should be thinking about or doing frequently. When it comes to building a repeatable model, there's going to be some testing and learning. Every time we deploy VSO to generate those cross-sell recommendations, there's a tuning phase. We take data in initially, we have initial output, and then we work with the sales team or the sales enablement team, or sometimes the product management team to generate, to review the recommendations and tweak it. We need to understand that data doesn't tell the whole story. You need to have some human intervention to review them and say, okay, this is working, this is not working, let's iterate and go forward. It also supports the story above it to just get started. You've tried something, you have learned, you are getting more effective over time. So that is the big idea when it comes to cross-selling within your sales motion. Now, keep in mind that as you move forward in this journey, you're going to need to think about your data inputs. One of those inputs is going to be, how do I group my customers together? You could go to Dun and Bradstreet if you wanted and like ring up a big bill and buy either Dunn's numbers or SIC numbers or NAICS codes. But our algorithm actually will find those groupings of customers who look and buy the same and generate those for you. So you don't need to do it all yourself. So we have an idea of how cross-selling fits into the rest of the sales motion, but you need to be careful. You shouldn't cross-sell to everybody all the time. And here's what I mean by that. 1 in 5 cross-buying journeys is unprofitable. And I want you to keep an eye out for 4 personas of your customers or prospects, because otherwise you're going to have a lot of effort that doesn't turn into any outcome or any additional money for you and your company. The first profile, these are the service demanders. Now, on that description, here it says they demand more service because they're buying more from you. And to a certain extent, that makes sense. If you buy more from me, I will give you more service in return. What I really mean here is be careful about your pain in the you-know-what customers. If they're already painful to deal with, selling them more is going to exacerbate the problem. A example that jumps to the top of my mind is, instead of shipping to them or having trailer drop-offs once or twice a week, maybe they want something multiple times per day. And what you need to be careful about here specifically is, yes, you're cross-selling them more, but you typically lose when it comes to your cost to serve elements. And those are soft costs. You need to keep an eye on them with your pain in the tuchus customers here. Next, your revenue returners. For some reason, there are companies that when they buy more, they just continue to return things over time. So you've only compounded your folly. By increasing your volume, you have once again driven up your soft cost, your cost to serve, because they just end up returning things. You probably have an idea of who these customers are already. If that's true, don't focus your cross-sell efforts on them because they'll eat it up in cost to serve. Number 3, the promotion maximizers. This one's near and dear to my heart. There are some customers that are only buying from you because you're trying to cut them a deal. It is frequent that when you are cross-selling, if you buy more from me, I will give you a better discount. And that's a fair thing, but you run the risk of attracting customers who are only going to buy from you because it's a low price. They are typically not loyal. They will probably defect as soon as they find a lower price elsewhere. So don't cut too deep when it comes to the promotional side of your cross-selling activities. And finally, spending limiters. These are customers that have a fixed amount that they will spend with a given vendor. We'll only spend 15% of our budget with a vendor, or $50,000 because they want to avoid vendor lock-in. If that's the case, then your play there is not to try to sell them more. You're working in a fixed space. What you want to do is make sure that you are optimizing the profitability of the basket they're selling. So it's a different thing than simply cross-selling to them, because you might be cannibalizing your more profitable sales if you do that. So we wanted to be, I guess, rather concise. To recap, we know 4 things now. Growth through pure pricing, it's stalling. The window's closing. You probably have some time to make sure that you're pushing that through, but you're going to need to find new opportunities for growth. Cross-selling is a great way to find that growth. In many ways, cross-selling is the olive branch from the pricing or sales enablement department to the sales team. Sure, we're going to tweak prices, but don't worry, you're not going to lose your volume. We found it all for you and then some. You're going to be able to hit your goals and exceed them. So that is where cross-selling fits into the whole organization. It is also a part of a holistic customer plan. It's not just like this one-off little activity that you do. You need to fit it into the big idea of how you are approaching your customers. And finally, be careful when you're cross-selling. Not all journeys are profitable. So that in a nutshell is what we at Vendavo think about cross-selling. I wanted to open it up. If you want to talk more about cross-selling on a one-to-one basis, that's fine. Reach out to me. I have my work email address here, my personal cell phone here, my LinkedIn is here. And if you want to be fancy and scan this for a QR code, it should take you to my LinkedIn page. And I think this is probably the right time for us to open it up for questions and answers. So, Patrick, what do you have for us?
Yeah, we have some good questions coming in. That was great, Dan. Thanks for going through all of that. I like the sort of high level nature of it and the strategies as opposed to sort of the down in the weeds. Our product can do this, that, or the other. So some good info there. Sort of piggybacking on some of that. One of the questions here, when you were showing Sales Optimizer, you referred to product recommendations versus category recommendations. What's the distinction there for cross-selling?
Oh, this is a great question, first off. The answer is it depends on the context. We generate them at all levels of typically a product hierarchy. In some instances, for example, where there's high product substitutability, batteries, you know that you need to sell a type of battery, like you need to sell a 9-volt battery. A customer doesn't care that it's Energizer or Duracell, right? So that's a higher level recommendation. However, in some instances, we find the granularity of data to be appropriate to make a specific SKU recommendation. So usually we'll generate we do generate all of those recommendations, and then it's kind of up to the salesperson to pick which one is appropriate for their context.
Good deal. Let's see, next one here. You mentioned data being perfect. What does perfect data look like, and what's good enough? How much is needed to get going with Sales Optimizer?
I have no idea what perfect data looks like, if I'm being honest, because nobody has perfect data. There's always some warts or freckles or whatever on it. But what does good enough data look like? So typically we use 3 data sources, and of course we can embellish this quite a bit, but you're probably going to need to provide product hierarchy data from your customer product master. Additionally, you'll want to provide customer hierarchy or customer master data, and that would be things like the industries they're in, could be a geographic component, it could be anything along those lines, descriptors of customers so we can figure out how to group them. And then of course, you need to have transaction data because that's where we understand the willingness to pay of a customer. Now, in addition to that, we can bring in customer potential data. That would probably be from a third-party data source where you can see, yeah, they're buying this much from me, but they could be buying this much. So to make sure that we are providing a large enough market basket for those customers. And, you know, the whole VSO is set up in a way that is built to iterate. So my advice is just start with what you have. You can always improve this or iterate once the solution is in place, and not to put too fine a point on it, but it's clicks, not code. You don't need to do a bunch of coding. You don't need to call Vendavo to make those tweaks for you. It's all in our administration console where you can make those tweaks. We're happy to coach on it. That's not a problem, and help you run through it the first couple of times, but ultimately you should be able to do it yourself.
Good deal. And yeah, it looks like another question sort of along the same lines. The question is, where does this data come from? I know you mentioned the transaction history. A lot of times that will come from CRM. What are some of the other sources that can be used there, or is that usually where it comes from?
Most of the time, yeah, that's a fair question. Where does the data come from? So at the start, we typically use a customer's internal data. And why I'm calling that out is we're not taking external data from the market to initially most of the time, because we have found that You know, it's usually a gold mine of what you already have from transactional data. And it comes from ERP. It can come from CRM. It's usually customer stuff. And then ERP also many times, or maybe it's a product information management system that has your product hierarchy in it and all the attributes that go with it. So those are usually the big sources where we receive data from.
Good deal. And I think you alluded to some of this as far as in the other coffee talk of how does this work, but the question is, this all makes sense in theory, but how does Sales Optimizer come up with these suggestions?
Sure. That's a fair question, and we can get way into the weeds with this one. So the first thing you need to do is group your customers, right? And we use something called, if you want to Google it, collaborative neighborhood filtering. And that is a way that we could use the data to tell us what groupings look like rather than the hard coding of going and grabbing like NAICS code data. So that's the first thing, group everybody in their neighborhoods is what we call it. So I look like everybody else in this particular neighborhood, so I can make inferences about what I should be buying, what a typical market basket for a neighborhood looks like. So that's part of it. And then we generate the recommendations based on basically how a neighborhood spends. We want to make sure that we depress the milk at the grocery store stuff. So we do we have an algorithm for that, inverse document frequency, to make sure that we're not recommending milk at the grocery store because we know everybody buys it. But then we're using your transactional data to say, okay, what is the typical size of an order of this product for this neighborhood that this specific customer should buy? Kind of a chain there, if you will.
Good deal. And one of the questions here, I think I can answer, but I'll let you chime in if you have any color. Is this a standalone solution in case an organization has no institutional CPQ or CRM?
Yes.
It is very much a standalone solution. You can access all of these recommendations in Sales Optimizer itself. You can even have it export if needed. It is designed to be sort of an API where it connects, but to something like a CPQ or CRM, but it is totally usable and effective as a standalone solution. Anything you want to add there?
Nothing to add. That was great.
All right. We do have a question. Can we get a recording of this coffee chat? Yes. This will be available shortly after we wrap up here. I believe all attendees will have access to this after the fact, and everyone else can go on to vendavo.com and sign up to see it there. You mentioned that Sales Optimizer interfaces with all CRM types. Can it interface with multiple CRM instances in the same company? We have several active instances of Salesforce and Dynamics, for example.
Yes, it can. That's the short answer. And to take it a step further, if we needed to generate different types of recommendations for a different business unit or sales organization, the solution handles that as well.
Yeah, and to that point, and sort of when you were talking about how does this work, one thing I would like to call out, if you are interested in how it works, you may be interested in the sort of AI behind it and all of that sort of stuff. And because it does use AI, it's one of our newer AI solutions. And one of the cool things about our AI is we use a Centaur model, so you can actually see what's going on. It's not this black box. Not only can you see what's going on like a clear box, but you can actually go in there and tweak stuff pretty easily. You don't need a data scientist or something like that to get in and understand what's going on inside there and make tweaks that help your company there. Let's see, we got a lot coming in. Does the system make suggestions in terms only of cross-sell and sell-up, or maybe is able to identify products with lower margin and suggest similar products with better margin?
Yes, a great example of this is I have used this in the past in just distribution companies that have their own private label. And it's not just distribution companies, manufacturers have this too. A private label versus a national brand. Maybe we want to make a recommendation to sell in our private label because the margins should be higher. And as a benefit, most of the time, the price point is lower for the customer. So you get that virtuous cycle there. But yes, the system can make those generate those recommendations based on margin profile.
All right, here's one. We have a similar tool for our sales team, but they hate what it comes up with, guessing the recommendations. How would it be better with this tool?
That's an interesting question. I mean, the question I need to answer a question with the question is, why do they hate it? Is it the inappropriate level of guidance? Like, is it the wrong level of product hierarchy? Is it just completely wrong? So you're generating recommendations that are inappropriate for a specific customer or for a neighborhood of customers. If that's the case, then, I mean, it's just changing the granularity of the recommendations, or tuning the algorithm over time, where the salespeople can say, no, these are bad, get better over time. Now, to put a statistic around that, we have a customer that has branches that sells, I'll just say automotive parts. And they had over 80% hit rate, effective, good recommendations that came out of VSO the first time we went through. And over time, it's approaching 90%. And I don't think you ever get to 100% with these recommendations. That's just never a feasible thing. But to understand why your sales team doesn't like the recommendations, that would be the first part. And then the second part is iterate and get better over time.
Yeah. And one of the cool things about Sales Optimizer is that it has this feedback loop with the sales team. So as people may have noticed on the screenshot, there's actually a sort of notes field that you can open up to say, this recommendation was terrible. So that creates this feedback loop between sales and the back office, so that you can actually hone those recommendations, not just with the AI, but through that human feedback, which is kind of invaluable. And I think the more we see of AI, the more valuable that sort of interaction is going to become.
If I can expand upon that, because you're right, Patrick, that's like the killer thing that goes with this, that it's learning all the time and getting better based on the distributed feedback from the whole sales team, rather than, one guy or gal who has the loudest voice.
Yeah.
So it fixes that problem. There's also the notion that as you're starting to get into the feedback piece of it, you're going to be we find out that the reasons that recommendations are wrong are quite vast. There are many reasons for a recommendation not to be a good one. It's out of season. This customer no longer buys this. There was a change in building codes, so this is no longer a relevant product. So that becomes something. Just looking at the reasons for rejections is a great periodic activity for a human analyst to go through and see if you can make other discernment about the reason for rejections. Of course, the algorithm already incorporates these no signals, but there's nothing like having a person look at it and make some other inferences on it. So that's a really cool benefit that we have found out by deploying this at our customers.
All right, it looks like we have one more here. Let's see. Oh, okay. It says, you mentioned the window to raise prices is closing. Can you talk more about how cross-sells help with that?
Oh, sure. So the conceit of what I said from an economics perspective is supply chains are opening up and inflation is coming down. And in some instances, inflation is actually negative or is deflation at this time. In an aggregate level, though, from the beginning of the pandemic to now, prices are up about 18%. Okay. Based on the inflation data that I see, it seems that it's kind of flattening. So this cover to just raise prices, and again, everybody raised prices. If you didn't raise prices and make more money off of that during the pandemic, you did something wrong. That window is closing because there's just not the cover to continue to raise prices. So the supply chain is generally pretty open now. Trucking, ocean freight, warehouse costs are in many cases below where they were pre-pandemic. And you need to find a new way to grow. So to do that is to offer a service to your customers. And that's by making good product recommendations, relevant product recommendations that for them when they're on their purchasing journey. So that's how it's not just a pure price thing. There has to be a little bit of a volume play now, which fell by the wayside during the pandemic.
Perfect. All right. Well, I think that does it for the questions here. If you want to go to that next slide, perfect. All right. So I did want to mention our next coffee talk. You're a pricing queen, kind of like Dan referred to in this one. It's, you don't have to have your perfect data to get started. Just start where you are and go from there. So this is about how to start down that pricing journey, how to get the good data and make a good business case to take your pricing to the next level. And then also we do have a couple in-person events for those in EMEA, in the Europe region. We'll have our Growth and Profitability Summit in Stockholm on October 17th, 18th. And for those in the US, we're getting together in Chicago, near you, Dan, September 13th and 14th, which I hear is a beautiful time of the year in Chicago.
It is. I hope to see you there.
Yeah, so please contact us if you would like to join either of these or visit vendavo.com. Dan, would you mind going back to your CT? There we go. And yeah, if you would like to connect with Dan, please reach out here or myself, available at vendavo.com. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.
Yeah, take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Have a good one.